The year is 1612, and on a lonely hill in the north of England, 12 people were accused of witchcraft, 10 of whom were then hanged. It was a time of intense superstition and paranoia. But who were these people, and just what were their crimes? If you don't know us, I'm Rachel, he's Wills, and we are Postcard and a Pint. Join us this Halloween for the story of the Pendle Witches, a story of a peddler, a handful of pins, and a curse that would change history. Pendle Hill rises majestically out of the Lancashire countryside. It is flanked on its south and east sides by the villages of Roughly, Fence, Barley, Newchurch in Pendle and Sabden. And at the start of the 17th century, there was nothing out of the ordinary or special about this place in Lancashire. Back in the 1600s, this area was one of the poorest and most isolated parts of England. It was rural, peaceful and unchanged, as it had been across the centuries. Our story involves two families.
The Demdike family.
And the Chattox family. Each led by an ageing matriarch, so-called wise women and folk witches, who sold charms to ward off sickness or to bring luck, but in a world where superstition ruled. These practices could easily be twisted into accusations of witchcraft. Years before the Pendle Witch Trials, Chattox bewitched a man called Robert Nutter after a quarrel, leading to his death. Although at the time nothing was done. But the appointment of King James I to the throne changed this. He was fearful of witchcraft and wrote a book called Demonology, which argued that witches were real. He passed the Witchcraft Act of 1604, making witchcraft a capital offence. All of a sudden, cows dying, milk spoiling, or illness in the family was no longer just nature. It was witchcraft. One March day in 1612, a young woman named Alison Devise, granddaughter of Old Demdike, met a peddler on a lonely road. His name was John Law. She asked him for some pins, and when he refused, she shouted after him. And moments later he collapsed, struck by a sudden paralysis. People said it was witchcraft. She panicked and, absolutely terrified, she confessed to cursing him and claimed her grandmother had taught her witchcraft. She begged forgiveness, but it was too late. The word witch had been spoken. News of this incident reached Roger Nowell, the Magistrate of Pendle. Eager to make a name for himself and encouraged by a king who hunted witches, he began to question the families. Under questioning, Alison accused Old Chattox and her daughter Anne Redfern of witchcraft. Old Chattox in turn blamed Old Demdike, saying she had sold her soul to a spirit. These four were quickly arrested and were the first of the trial's prisoners to be held in the dungeons of Lancaster Castle. While these four were imprisoned, the rest of the families and friends gathered at Malkin Tower. This wasn't a castle or a large house. It was most likely a small farm dwelling associated with Old Demdike and her family. But why was this meeting so important to the story? On Good Friday in 1612, several of the Pendle Witches were said to have gathered here. The actual location of this cottage has been lost, but it's thought to have been near Newchurch in Pendle. Newchurch in Pendle today is a charming village on the slopes of Pendle Hill. It certainly still celebrates its witching history. But back then, word got out that a witches' coven had been held this evening. They had supposedly named victims to curse or kill. They'd eaten stolen meat and planned to blow up Lancaster Castle to free Demdike, Chattox, Redfern and Alison. News of this reached Roger Nowell, and many of those who'd attended were arrested along with other suspected witches. Elizabeth Devise, James Devise, Catherine Hewitt, Jane Bulcock, John Bulcock, Isabel Roby, Alice Gray, Margaret Pearson and Alice Nutter were all arrested. All of these were related to or were friends of the four held in prison. They could all have fitted the description of witch, except one, Alice Nutter. Alice was from the village of Roughly. Today this is a beautiful village with a stream running tranquilly through. It even has a statue remembering her. She was wealthy, from a more respected family. She was a landowner and a widow. So how could someone who came from such a background be accused of witchcraft? She was branded a witch due to the testimony of a 9-year-old child. That child was Janet Devise. Janet was the 9-year-old daughter of Elizabeth Devise. She named Alice as someone who attended the Malkin Tower meeting. Until this time, children were always considered as unreliable witnesses, but judges and magistrates were desperate for witnesses in the witchcraft hysteria, as evidence of magic was virtually impossible to produce. It said Roger Nowell had lost a land dispute with Alice, and Janet's testimony got rid of Alice for him, but that testimony also convicted her mother and sister. In the village of Newchurch in Pendle, you'll find St Mary's Church, a beautiful Grade II listed Anglican parish church. The church is renowned for its distinctive Eye of God feature and an interesting grave.
Some people claim that this was the family grave. You can just make out the word Nutter here. But was Alice buried here?
Probably not, as witches weren't buried on consecrated ground. And although some say the Eye of God is to ward off evil spirits and witches, to be honest, this is more legend than fact. It's certainly a way that the village celebrates its eerie history. 12 people were now being held in the dungeons of Lancaster Castle, and the trial was imminent. They were held in cramped, cold and unsanitary cells. And
down these steps are where they were actually held.
In 1612, Lancaster Castle was already hundreds of years old. It was originally a Norman fortress, built shortly after the Norman conquests and expanded through the Middle Ages. It was a royal fortress guarding the northwest. It was the seat of the assize courts, where serious criminal trials were held, and it was the county prison for Lancashire. The scene for the trial was set. Sadly, old Demdike, Elizabeth Southerns, died in prison before the trials began. The hall was likely crowded during the witch trials, filled with townspeople, gentry, clerks and guards. There was no defence counsel as we know it today. The accused were allowed to speak, but the judges and jury were biased towards guilt. Elizabeth Devise, accused of causing the deaths of 3 people by witchcraft and hosting the Good Friday meeting at Malkin Tower. Her own daughter, aged 9, testified against her. The verdict? Guilty. Alison Devise, accused of bewitching John Law, a travelling peddler, and causing paralysis at the start of this whole story. The verdict? Guilty. James Devise, brother of Alison, accused of killing animals and people using witchcraft, and said to have stolen a sheep for the Good Friday gathering. Again, guilty. Anne Whittle, Old Chattocks, accused of killing Robert Nutter and others by witchcraft. Verdict, guilty. Anne Redfern, daughter of Old Chattocks, also charged with the murder of Robert Nutter. Verdict, guilty. Alice Nutter, our respectable and educated woman, accused of attending the witches' meeting at Malkin Tower on Good Friday by the testimony of Janet Devise, aged 9. Verdict, guilty. Catherine Hewitt, said to have attended the Malkin Tower meeting and helped murder a child by witchcraft. Verdict, guilty. Jane and John Bulcock, mother and son from Newchurch in Pendle, accused of attending the Malkin Tower gathering and conspiring with others. Their verdict? Both guilty. Jeanette Preston, charged with the murder by witchcraft of Thomas Lister. She was tried earlier at York Assizes and found guilty. She was hanged at York, but is associated with the Pendle Witches as she knew members of the Demdike and Chattocks families. And finally, Alice Gray, accused of witchcraft like the others, but the evidence against her was weak. She was acquitted and was the only one to escape execution. The trial took 2 days, and the judges, Sir Edward Bromley and Sir James Altham, delivered death sentences over all but Alice Gray. The accused were taken back down to the dungeons of Lancaster Castle to await their execution the next day. On the 20th of August 1612, the condemned were marched through town to Gallows Hill. Local folklore says that they stopped at an inn on the way. One inn that holds claim to this is the Golden Lion on Moor Lane in Lancaster. It's still a functioning pub today, and some locals claim that the witches' spirits still haunt the cellars today. After their final drink of ale, up to Gallows Hill they went. This site doesn't exist as it once did. Tell us more, Wills.
Now, just through there in the grounds of the Lancaster Grammar School stood Gallows Hill, which is where these poor people were hung.
We wonder if their spirits still haunt this school today. Unlike the burning at the stake, often associated with witchcraft in Europe, English law mandated hanging for those convicted of witchcraft under the Witchcraft Act of 1604. At the gallows, one by one, the prisoners were hanged until dead. And that's the story of the Pendle Witches, a chilling case that changed English history forever. From fear and superstition to folklore and legend, their story still echoes through the hills of Lancashire today. Now you can visit the Pendle Witch Trial and walk in their footsteps, winding through the same beautiful countryside where these events unfolded over 400 years ago. It's a beautiful part of England and an area we really enjoyed visiting. We've been Postcards and a Pint. Thank you for watching. Don't have nightmares, and happy Halloween.
Did you hear about the twin witches?
No.
You can't tell which is which.
Ah.